There is a moment in every man's life when he discovers an uncomfortable truth. The world does not celebrate his success. He punishes him for it. From the dawn of civilization, those who have amassed power, wealth, and influence have learned a lesson that separates the survivors from the destroyed. A simple lesson, but deeply counterintuitive. A lesson that Machiavelli, the architect of modern power, codified 5 centuries ago, and that remains as relevant today as it was in the Renaissance courts of Florence. Wealth is not just money. It is freedom. It's choice. It is the ability to shape your reality. But wealth is also a target painted on his back. And those who do not understand this pay a brutal price. Niccolò Machiavelli did not write The Prince to entertain aristocrats. He wrote a survival manual for a world where the appearance of virtue matters more than virtue itself, where envy is more powerful than admiration, where your friends today can be your enemies tomorrow, simply because you dared to prosper while they stagnated. You live in a society that preaches transparency, authenticity, sharing. Be yourself, they say. Show your journey, they insist. Inspire others with your success, they proclaim. And millions fall into this trap every day. They post their wins on Instagram. They show off their new cars. They advertise their promotions. They publicly celebrate each achievement. And then they wonder why friendships have cooled. Why did poisonous comments appear? Why people who never wished them harm began to secretly cheer for their downfall. The problem is not wealth. The problem is its display. Over the next few minutes, we will not simply list aphorisms about humility. Let's dive deep into the psychology of power that Machiavelli mastered. Let's dissect why the golden rule, when you get rich, tell no one, is not only prudent, but absolutely essential for anyone who wants to keep what they have achieved. You will learn the 7 Machiavellian laws of silent wealth. Each of them is underpinned by deep psychological principles, illustrated by devastating historical cases, and directly applicable to your life today. This is not a video about modesty. It's about strategy, about protection, about understanding human nature in its rawest state and using that knowledge to defend yourself. Get ready. Because what you're about to learn can transform not only how you handle money, but how you navigate the power game itself. Law 1. Invisibility is the king's shield. He who displays his crown invites conspiracy. He who hides his treasure keeps his kingdom. The first Machiavellian law of wealth is simple. Visibility breeds vulnerability. The more people know about your resources, the more they can exploit, manipulate, or attack you. Silent wealth is not cowardice. It is strategic fortification. Machiavelli understood something fundamental about human nature. Men do not hate what they do not know. Envy, this social poison, needs fuel. It needs comparison, need details, need to know exactly what you have that they don't. When you hide your prosperity, you remove the primary trigger of envy. People cannot specifically covet what they cannot see or quantify. They can't plot to take what they don't know you have. There's a reason why nature's most efficient predators are also the quietest. The leopard does not roar before attacking. The snake does not announce its presence. The shark does not stir up the waters. They understand that the element of surprise, invisibility, is power. In modern human psychology, there is a phenomenon called social comparison theory. Human beings constantly measure their relative worth by comparing themselves to others. When you provide specific data points about your success, you force your peers to compare themselves to you. And when that comparison is unfavorable to them, the emotional response is not admiration, it's resentment. Invisibility breaks this cycle before it begins. Rome, 53 BC. Marcus Licinius Crassus was the richest man in the Roman Republic. His fortune was so vast that he owned a third of the city of Rome. He financed entire armies. His personal resources rivaled the state treasury, and Crassus couldn't stop talking about it. He organized ostentatious banquets. He displayed his collection of educated slaves. He financed public works and made sure that everyone knew that he was the benefactor. He wanted recognition. He wanted his wealth to translate into political status equivalent to that of Pompey the Great and Julius Caesar. But the more Crassus displayed his fortune, the more he became a target. In the Senate, he was ridiculed as a wealthy merchant with no true Roman virtue. On the street, he was viewed with suspicion as someone who had enriched himself through questionable methods during Sulla's proscriptions. Among the military, he was disrespected as a man who bought wars, not won them. Crassus's obsessive need for recognition led him to his fatal decision to invade Parthia. He needed a spectacular military victory that would equal his riches. He needed to prove that he was more than just money. At Carrhae, Crassus's army was massacred. He was captured. And, according to legend, the Parthians poured molten gold down his throat, a perfect symbolic death for a man who couldn't stop talking about his wealth. The lesson is crystal clear. Crassus had all the resources to live a life of immense power, but his need for display set him on a path that ended in humiliation and death. If he had quietly exerted influence, controlled Rome through proxies, kept his wealth as a strategic secret rather than a flag, he might have lived on as the real power behind the throne. But he chose visibility, and visibility destroyed it. You see this pattern repeating itself constantly today. The entrepreneur who is successful with his startup and immediately buys a Lamborghini to post on Instagram. 3 months later, former colleagues are suing him for unrecognized contributions. Business partners begin to renegotiate contracts, knowing exactly how much he can afford. The executive who announces his promotion and new salary on LinkedIn. Suddenly, friends who haven't spoken to him in years reappear with investment opportunities or loan applications. Distant relatives discover financial emergencies. The federal revenue intensifies its audits. The cryptocurrency investor who, during the bull market, does not stop posting screenshots of his gains. When the market turns, he becomes the target of scammers who know exactly how much he has. Worse, when he loses, everyone knows. And the public humiliation is amplified by the previous public celebration. Visible wealth creates 4 simultaneous problems. First, it establishes you as a target for resource extraction. Everyone, from your relatives to literal criminals, see you as a potential source of money. Second, it creates social expectations. Once people know you have money, they expect constant generosity. Refusing becomes offensive in a way that it never would be if they didn't know. Third, it destroys authentic relationships. You'll never know for sure again if people like you or your possibilities. Fourth, it invites regulation and scrutiny. Whether it's from the IRS, ex-spouses, authorities, or anyone with a reason to question their finances. First tactic, establish a modest financial persona that doesn't match your reality. If you earn 10 times as much as your friends, live as if you earn twice as much. Drive a good car, but not exceptional. Dress well, but not ostentatiously. Live in a nice neighborhood, but not the most expensive one. Second tactic, when asked directly about finances, develop vague answers that satisfy curiosity without providing usable data. "I'm doing well, thank you," is infinitely superior to specific numbers. If pressed, redirect. "I prefer not to discuss specific values, but I'm comfortable." Third tactic, completely separate your social circles from your financial transactions. Your friends shouldn't know the details of your business. Your business partners should not become your close friends. Overlap creates inevitable conflicts of interest. Law. 2. Envy is deadlier than the sword. You can defend yourself from direct attacks, but it cannot defend itself from attacks that it does not see coming. And envy always strikes from behind. The second law recognizes that envy is not only uncomfortable, it is operationally dangerous. Machiavelli observed that princes fall not by the hands of known enemies, but by the betrayal of those who harbored silent resentment. Envy is the most destructive and least recognized emotion on the human spectrum. Unlike anger, which is hot and obvious, envy is cold and patient. It slowly erodes relationships, turns allies into saboteurs. Worse, people rarely admit to feeling jealous, even to themselves. Nietzsche called envy resentment, a powerless anger directed at those who own what you want but can't have. It is the emotion of those who perceive themselves as victims of circumstances. And it's incredibly common. Psychologically, envy arises from a perception of injustice. When someone sees you thriving, your brain asks an unconscious question, why him and not me? If they can't find a satisfactory answer, if you don't seem to have worked harder or be smarter or more deserving, envy sets in. And once installed, envy seeks to balance the scales, not elevating the envious, but lowering the envied. If they can't have what you have, they want to make sure you lose. Machiavelli was pragmatic about this. It is impossible to completely avoid envy. Someone will always envy you for something, but you can avoid becoming the primary target of collective envy. And the way to do this is by controlling what others know about you. Florence, 1478. The Medici family had risen from bankers to de facto rulers of the Florentine Republic. Lorenzo de' Medici, the Magnificent, was the most powerful man in the city. But he made a mistake. He allowed his wealth and influence to become outrageously obvious. The Medici financed the arts. They ordered palaces. Lorenzo walked through Florence like an uncrowned king, surrounded by poets, philosophers, and artists who sang his praises. He was brilliant, charismatic, and publicly unquestionably dominant. The Pazzi family, also Florentine bankers, watched all this with growing resentment. They had comparable fortunes, they had connections, but they did not have the pomp, the recognition, the almost royal status of the Medici. And the more Lorenzo displayed, the more unbearable the comparison became. Envy turned into a conspiracy. With the support of Pope Sixtus IV, who had his own reasons for hating the Medici, the Pazzi planned to assassinate Lorenzo and his brother Giuliano during a mass in the Cathedral of Florence. The plan was brutal: kill the Medici at the holiest moment in front of the entire Florentine elite, and take control of the city in the resulting chaos. On April 26, 1478, during the elevation of the Host, the assassins attacked. Giuliano was stabbed 19 times and died on the floor of the cathedral. Lorenzo barely survived, wounded but alive. The conspiracy failed, and Lorenzo's revenge was relentless. Francesco Pazzi was captured and hanged from the windows of the Palazzo Vecchio. Other conspirators were hunted down, tortured, and executed. The Pazzi family was destroyed, their property confiscated, their name banned, even their coats of arms erased from the buildings of Florence. But here's the truth that history books often omit. This tragedy was predictable. The Pazzi's envy did not come out of nowhere. It was cultivated for years of watching the Medici flaunt their supremacy. Every sumptuous party, every public artistic commission, every display of influence was a reminder to the Pazzi of their secondary position. Had Lorenzo exercised his power more discreetly, if he had allowed the Pazzi to maintain their public dignity while he controlled Florence through less visible channels, the motivation for the attack would have been drastically reduced. The display didn't just invite envy, it made her unbearable. You see this dynamic in every office, in every group of friends, in every family, the person who gets promoted and can't stop talking about it. The friend who buys a bigger house and invites everyone to see it. The relative who finally made it and makes sure everyone knows. On the surface, people smile. Congratulations. But watch what happens next. The little sabotage begins. At work, important information accidentally doesn't reach you. Colleagues begin to question his decisions publicly. Rumors about favoritism or questionable methods begin to circulate. Among friends, invitations are starting to become rare. When you talk about your projects, the energy in the room changes. Future successes are met with, "It must be good," rather than genuine joy. Gradually, you realize that you are being socially isolated. In the family, requests for financial help increase exponentially, and when you refuse, because you can't subsidize everyone indefinitely, you become the selfish rich man. Family gatherings become minefields of passive-aggressive comments. The most insidious aspect of envy is that it corrupts perception. Once someone envies you, everything you do is reinterpreted through that lens. If you succeed, it's because you've been lucky or cheated. If you fail, it's cosmic justice. There is no way to win once envy has set in. The only solution is prevention. Do not feed the beast. First tactic, practice strategic humility. When something good happens, minimize it publicly while celebrating it privately. If you received a large bonus, your public response should be, "I'm grateful, it's been a good year," and not the specific amount or comparisons with others. Second tactic, also share your challenges and failures, even when things are going well. This does not mean lying, but it does mean giving context. Yes, the business is growing, but margins are tight, and I'm sleeping 4 hours a night is much less envious-provoking than the business is exploding. Third tactic, divert credit and attention whenever possible. When praised, credit luck, timing, your team, your mentor, anything that distributes the perception of success and makes you less of a singular target of envy. Fourth tactic, identify the chronic envious people in your life and keep them at arm's length. Some people are unable to feel genuine joy in the success of others. You can't fix that. You can only minimize your exposure to them by sharing less and less until they essentially know nothing about your real life. Law 3. The appearance of struggle grants legitimacy. The man who seems to have conquered everything effortlessly will be hated. The man who seems to have conquered everything despite immense suffering will be admired. The third Machiavellian law is perhaps the most counterintuitive. You must allow people to see that you have worked, fought, sacrificed, but never how much you earned for it. The effort generates sympathy. The result generates envy. Show one, hide the other. There is a deep psychological reason why we love self-made man stories and despise trust fund babies. It's not just about merit. It's about storytelling. It's about feeling like success has been earned, not given. Machiavelli understood that political legitimacy did not come only from power, but from the perception that that power was precisely obtained. A prince who inherits a kingdom has legal authority, but not emotional authority. A prince who conquers a kingdom through visible effort has both. The same applies to wealth. When people see only your end result, the house, the car, the lifestyle, with no context for how you got there, your brain fills in the blank with the most convenient explanation: luck, privilege, dishonesty. These explanations preserve your ego. He's not better than me, he just had advantages that I didn't have. But when they see the process, the sleepless nights, the risks taken, the failures overcome, the narrative changes. Now you're not a lucky one. You are a warrior who has earned his scars, and this generates respect instead of resentment. The key is accurate balance. Show enough effort to justify perceived success, but not actual success. Allow people to think that you are doing well because you worked hard. Don't let them know exactly how well you're doing. Andrew Carnegie, in 1901, sold his steel company to J.P. Morgan for $480 million, becoming the richest man in the world. In today's money, that would equate to more than $300 billion, a fortune that would make Jeff Bezos look modest. But Carnegie had a problem. He was Scottish, an immigrant, and had built his fortune in an era where robber barons were widely hated. Workers died in their factories. Strikes were broken with violence. Inequality was obscene, and people were angry. Carnegie could have been destroyed by public opinion, prosecuted into bankruptcy, or worse. Instead, he ran one of the most brilliant PR campaigns in history. He published his autobiography, focusing not on his wealth, but on his poverty of origin. He told stories of working as a bobbin boy in a cotton mill at the age of 13, earning $1.20 a week, to study at night, to climb slowly through sheer determination and intelligence, of every sacrifice along the way. The narrative was carefully constructed. Yes, I am rich, but look how much I suffered to get here. Look at how many nights I worked. Look at the risks I took. I'm proof that the American dream works. And it worked magnificently. Instead of being seen as an explorer, Carnegie was repackaged as the embodiment of the self-made man. His immense wealth was retroactively justified by his narrative of effort. But here's the genius. At the same time that he made his journey public, he kept the specific details of his wealth extremely private. People knew he was rich. They didn't know exactly how rich. They didn't know the details of their properties, investments, or personal expenses. He showed the fight. He hid the treasure. And he died revered as a philanthropist, not hated as a tyrant. The contrast with his contemporaries is instructive. John D. Rockefeller, who kept both his wealth and his journey relatively private, was demonized. Cornelius Vanderbilt, who boasted both, was snubbed. Carnegie, who perfectly calibrated what to show and what to hide, was loved. On social media today, you see two types of entrepreneurs. The first guy posts photos of private jets, Rolex watches, stacks of cash. They boast pure results. These are the ones who receive hateful comments, complaints to tax authorities, and constant attempts to take them down. The second type posts photos working at 2 a.m., shows rejected drafts. It talks about the years of fighting before the breakthrough. It shares failures and lessons learned. They build loyal communities that cheer them on. Both can have the same level of real success. The difference is entirely in the presentation. The modern strategy is simple. Build a public narrative of hard work and gradual progress. Let people see you as a grinder, someone who is constantly improving, facing challenges, overcoming obstacles. This generates camaraderie. People identify with the struggle, not the ultimate success. In the meantime, keep your actual financial milestones completely private. When you hit a big goal, say your first $1 million in profit, don't post about it. Maybe post about how you finally managed to implement that system you had been trying for months. Same achievement, totally different framework. The result is that you build respect without arousing envy. People think, this guy is working hard and improving, instead of, this guy is getting rich and I'm not. The arsenal, practical application. First tactic. When discussing your work, always focus on the process and challenges, never on the bottom line. I'm working on scaling my operation is much better than I've doubled my revenue. Second tactic, share failures strategically. It doesn't have to be devastating, but short stories of obstacles overcome humanize you and make your success seem more legitimate. I tried this strategy and it completely failed, so I had to pivot, is narrative gold. Third tactic, if you must display something, display work tools, not status symbols. A photo of your work setup, your books, your team collaborating, this builds credibility. A picture of your new car, this builds resentment. Fourth tactic, use the language of gratitude and humility even when sharing achievements. I was very lucky with the timing. Goes much further than I dominated this market. Both may be true, but the perception is dramatically different. Law 4. Close friends are the most dangerous traitors. The declared enemy hurts you from the front, where you can defend yourself. The envious friend stabs you in the back, where you never thought you needed armor. The fourth law is perhaps the most painful. When you get rich, it is often those closest to you who pose the greatest danger, not out of necessary malice, but out of proximity to their vulnerability. Machiavelli devoted entire chapters of The Prince to the problem of confidants. He noted that the closer someone is to the center of power, the greater the temptation to usurp or betray it. And the psychological mechanism behind it is devastatingly simple. Familiarity breeds not only affection, but also presumption. When you ascend quickly, your old friends experience a profound cognitive dissonance. They know you as you were, the college buddy who shared pizza, the friend who complained about the boss along with them. This image is deeply etched. When their current reality doesn't match that picture, their brains resist. There are two ways to resolve this dissonance. The first is to adjust the image. He has changed, he has grown, he has evolved. This requires humility and the acceptance that perhaps they too need to change. It's difficult. The second path is easier, deciding that you don't deserve it where you are. He was lucky. He changed in a negative way. He forgot where he came from. He's no longer the person I knew. This preserves their ego and justifies their resentment. And here's the danger. Close friends have access. They know your patterns, your vulnerabilities, your secrets, your literal and metaphorical passwords. A distant enemy may want to destroy you but has no tools. An envious friend has the entire arsenal. Shakespeare understood this when he wrote about Brutus stabbing Caesar. Caesar yells, "Et tu, Brute?" Not because the stab wound hurt more, but because it came from the one he loved. The betrayal of others is not only dangerous, it's devastating. Rome, 44 BC. Julius Caesar had become the most powerful man in the known world. He had conquered Gaul, defeated Pompey, crossed the Rubicon, and became dictator for life. His power was absolute. His external enemies were crushed. But Caesar made a fatal mistake. He believed that his friends shared his vision, that they would understand that their power was necessary for the stability of Rome. That decades of camaraderie meant unconditional loyalty. Marcus Brutus was like an adopted son to Caesar. He had been pardoned after fighting alongside Pompey. Caesar promoted him, trusted him, planned to let him rule entire provinces. Decimus Brutus had served with Caesar in Gaul, commanded his fleets, shared his tents. These were not distant enemies, they were close friends, and they were the ones who led the conspiracy to assassinate him. Why? Not because Caesar had personally wronged them, but because they, Roman aristocrats raised in the republican tradition, could not accept that their friend was now above them on a scale that made friendship impossible. The presupposed equality of friendship was incompatible with the reality of inequality of power. Caesar had raised them, but not enough. They were still subordinates. And proud men do not tolerate subordination to those they still see as equals. On the Ides of March in the Senate, Caesar was stabbed 23 times. Most of the scams came from friends. When he saw Brutus among the assassins, he pulled his toga over his face and stopped fighting. The betrayal broke not only his body, but his spirit. The brutal irony: if Caesar had kept his rise more distant, more formal, more impersonal, if he had treated Brutus as a valuable official rather than a close friend, the emotional barrier required for assassination would have been much greater. Familiarity did not create contempt, but it did create the illusion of broken equality. And this broken illusion has generated revenge. You see this pattern repeating itself constantly in the modern business world. Two friends start a company together. One of them turns out to be significantly better in execution, in sales, in leadership. The company grows. It naturally takes more control, more recognition, more profit sharing. The other friend, who contributed equally at the beginning but was unable to keep up with the growth, begins to feel resentment. "We started this together," becomes his mantra. The initial 50-50 equity now feels like a debt that will never be fully paid off, no matter how successful the company is. And then the subtle sabotage begins. Unshared information, decisions publicly questioned, customers negatively influenced, and eventually the lawsuit. He stole my idea from me. He forced me out. I built it, and he took the credit. Or consider the most common family scenario. You lend money to a close friend during difficult times. You can pay because you prospered. He needs it because he has stagnated. You genuinely want to help and don't think twice. But the loan creates a power dynamic. Every time you meet, this debt is present, even if it is not mentioned. Every time you talk about your plans, he's reminded that you have resources while he doesn't. Friendship, which was based on perceived equality, is now permanently unbalanced. And what happens? 9 times out of 10, you never get the money back. Worse, you lose your friend too. Because in his mind, unconsciously, the best way to solve this imbalance is not to pay, which requires recognizing your need, but to convince yourself that you don't deserve to receive. He doesn't need that money. He's fine. In fact, he probably owes it to me in some way that I'm not remembering right now. First tactic. When you ascend financially, gradually increase the social distance from friends who have not ascended with you. Not out of cruelty, but out of mutual protection. See them less often. Share fewer details. Maintain affection, but reduce operational intimacy. This prevents them from becoming vectors of problems. Second tactic, never, ever, under any circumstances, mix personal finances with close friendships. Don't lend money to friends. Don't do business with close friends. Don't hire friends in crucial positions. The temptation is enormous because you trust them, but that trust will be eroded by the inevitable power dynamics. Third tactic, if you must help a friend financially, do so through a gift you can afford never to see again, not a loan. I can't lend it, but here's X as a gift. Preserves the friendship much better than creating a debt that will poison the relationship. Fourth tactic. Watch carefully how your friends react to your first victories. Those who show genuine joy without qualifications or buts are rare and precious. Those that immediately start with "it must be good" or "I could do it too if" are showing you who they are. Believe in them and adjust your sharing level accordingly. Up to this point, we have established the defensive pillars of silent wealth. You have learned that invisibility is protection, that envy is more deadly than open hostility, that visible effort grants legitimacy, but visible results invite destruction, and that those closest to him often represent the greatest dangers. These are the walls that protect your kingdom. They are defensive, but absolutely essential. Machiavelli understood that before conquering, you must first learn not to lose. Before you can expand, you should consolidate. Before you display power, you must ensure that no one can take it away from you. But the power game is not just about protection. It's about growth. It's about influence. It's about using your wealth to create even more advantages, even more freedom, even more control over your destiny. Hook for part 2. And this is where we enter much more sophisticated territory. The next 3 laws aren't about hiding what you have. It's about using what you have in ways that others don't realize. They are about silent leverage, about power through proxy, about controlling perceptions without being seen controlling. These are the tactics not of defenders, but of architects of empires. Not of those who only protect their wealth, but of those who multiply it while remaining in the shadows. Machiavelli called this virtù, the ability to shape fortune rather than be shaped by it, and it requires not only discretion but active strategy. If you found the first 4 laws difficult, get ready, because what comes next requires not only discipline but vision, not just silence but silent eloquence, not just invisibility but invisible presence. Let's now enter the realm of ghost operations, where true power moves without a trace. Part 2. The Advanced Tactics. Law 5. Control through others, never directly. The king who rules through. Edicts is visible and vulnerable. The king who rules through trusted advisors is protected by layers of deniability. But the true master is the one who rules through kings who do not even know they are being ruled. The fifth law elevates the concept of invisibility to an art. Real power is not exercised directly, but through influence over those who appear to have power. You don't become the visible CEO, you become the silent investor that the CEO consults before every major decision. Machiavelli observed that princes who ruled directly were constantly vulnerable. Every unpopular decision was attributed to them. Every failure tarnished his reputation. Each success created envy. The visibility of absolute power made them absolute targets. The most successful princes ruled through intermediaries. They had ministers who implemented controversial policies. They had generals who conducted brutal wars. They had counselors who were blamed when things went wrong and who shared credit when things went right. This was not cowardice. It was strategic architecture. In modern psychology, there is a concept called the external locus of causality. When people cannot clearly identify the source of an outcome, they attribute it to circumstances, to systems, to impersonal forces. But when there is a clear face, a specific name, all the responsibility, positive and negative, flows to that person. By becoming invisible in the chain of causality, you escape both guilt and envy. You can wield tremendous influence without carrying the weight of public responsibility. This is the secret of true billionaires. You don't know their names. They do not appear on Forbes lists. They don't give interviews. They control through holding companies, through trusts, through advisors, through multiple layers of corporations that obscure real ownership. And so they remain untouched while their power grows exponentially. Armand Jean Duplessis, Cardinal Richelieu, is the perfect example of power through proxy brought to perfection. During the reign of Louis XV of France, 1610-1643, Richelieu served as prime minister and became the most powerful man in the kingdom. But notice the elegance of his position. He was not the king. Technically, he served the king. Every edict, every war, every execution was issued in the name of Louis XIV. The king sat on the throne, received the ambassadors, was painted in the official portraits. He had all the visibility and all the pomp of absolute power. Meanwhile, Richelieu operated behind the scenes. He controlled the finances. He directed foreign policy. He decided which nobles would live and which would die. He transformed France from a fragmented nation into a centralized power. But everything was done in the name of Her Majesty. When policies were unpopular, and many were, especially brutal taxes to fund wars, anger was directed at the king, not the cardinal. When nobles were executed for treason, it was royal justice, not Richelieu's personal revenge. When France won wars, Louis XV received the glory. When he lost, Richelieu publicly fired generals while remaining above criticism. Richelieu had created the perfect system, absolute control with diffuse responsibility. He was protected by his formal position. A cardinal of the church was untouchable without massive political consequences, and by his relationship with the king, he was the loyal servant, not the usurper. Even his enemies, and there were many, including the king's mother, could not attack him directly without seeming to attack the very institution of the monarchy. And when they tried, Richelieu simply advised the king on how to deal with conspirators, resulting in his arrest or exile. He died of natural causes at the height of his power, one of the few men in history to wield absolute power for decades without being assassinated, deposed, or exiled. His secret? He was always the counselor, never the sovereign. Power through proxy has kept him safe. In the modern corporate world, you see this dynamic in smart investors. They do not become CEOs of the companies they control. They become board members, majority investors, or strategic partners. They have veto power over important decisions, but the CEO is the one who appears on CNBC, who answers to shareholders, who gets crucified when stocks fall. Warren Buffett mastered this. He owns large stakes in dozens of companies, but does not operate them directly. He advises and suggests, and because of the respect he has built, his suggestions are followed. But when Coca-Cola or American Express make controversial decisions, it's not Buffett who is publicly attacked. Or consider the great strategic consultants. McKinsey, BCG, Bain, these are essentially power mercenaries. They enter corporations, do analysis, recommend massive job cuts or brutal restructuring. The company implements it. The workers are furious. But with whom? With the CEO who had to make tough choices, not with the consultants who have already left for the next client. That's the genius of power through others. You affect outcomes without taking responsibility. In your personal life, this may mean influencing family decisions through the family member that others listen to, rather than arguing directly. It may mean getting your ideas presented by colleagues with more political capital. It may mean funding projects through third parties so that your name never appears on official documents. First tactic, whenever possible, structure your investments and properties through corporate entities, trusts, or LLCs. Your personal name should not appear in public records of ownership of real estate, companies, or large assets. This isn't evasion, it's legal strategic privacy. Second tactic, cultivate relationships with trusted implementers, people who have public credibility or formal authority and who trust your judgment. When you have an idea or agenda, plant it in them and let them be the public face. You provide the strategy, they provide the visible execution. Third tactic, when donating to causes or funding projects, do so anonymously or through generically named foundations. The impact is the same, but you avoid both endless requests and public association with causes that can become controversial. Fourth tactic, in conflict situations, never be the bearer of bad news or unpopular decisions yourself. Have a lawyer, a manager, a representative who communicates these things. This creates a layer of emotional isolation between you and the affected person. Law 6. Strategic generosity buys quiet loyalty. The man who accumulates without giving creates enemies. The man who gives ostentatiously creates dependents and envious. But the man who gives strategically in secret to the right few creates an invisible network of loyalty that protects his kingdom. The sixth law resolves a paradox. You can't hold significant wealth without eventually sharing it. But how do you give without creating the problems we discussed? The answer is secret, specific, and strategic generosity. Machiavelli had a very pragmatic view of generosity. He argued that princes should be neither overly stingy nor overly generous in public. Pettiness breeds hatred. Public generosity generates unsustainable expectations and eventually bankruptcy. But he recognized that loyalty must be bought. No one serves you out of idealism alone. People need material incentives. The question is not whether you should reward allies, but how to do so in a way that maximizes loyalty while minimizing complications. The answer lies in 3 psychological principles. First, secret generosity creates gratitude without creating envy in others. When you help someone publicly, everyone else wonders, why not me? When you help someone in secret, only that person knows and only that person is grateful. Second, specific and personalized generosity has much more impact than generic generosity. $1,000 means little to someone who already has millions, but it can change the life of a student struggling to pay rent. Knowing exactly what someone needs and providing it discreetly creates a deep emotional debt. Third, generosity without explicit expectation, but with perfect timing, creates unconscious reciprocity. You don't say, "I'm helping you and you owe me." You only help when they need it most. Years later, when you need something, they remember and feel compulsive to give it back. This is not cynical manipulation. It's recognition of how relationships really work. The people who are most loyal to you are not the ones you paid the most, but the ones you helped when no one else would. Key case study: the Rothschilds and the strategic debt system. The Rothschild family in the 19th century became the most powerful banking dynasty in Europe, not through ostentation, but through strategic generosity that created a network of political and financial loyalty that was impossible to break. But they did not make ostentatious public donations. His strategy was much more sophisticated. During the Napoleonic Wars, while other bankers fled risk, the Rothschilds lent money to desperate governments, but discreetly through private channels on terms that were generous enough to be accepted, but structured to create long-term dependence. When Clemens von Metternich, the Austrian statesman, faced personal financial problems, the Rothschilds did not make a humiliating public loan. They discreetly covered their debts through private arrangements. Metternich never forgot. And for decades, he was an invaluable political ally to Rothschild interests in Austria. When Pope Gregory XVI needed financing for the papal state, the Rothschilds provided loans on favorable terms, but only after securing exclusive rights to certain papal banking operations. No ostentation, only private transactions that consolidated power. Genius was in the pattern. They identified key figures in positions of power or potential. They waited until these figures faced a crisis, financial, political, personal, and then they offered discreet assistance that solved the immediate problem without public humiliation. The result? A European network of nobles, ministers, military officers, and clergy who owed positions or solvency to the Rothschilds. Not publicly, not in a way that created scandal, but enough that when the Rothschilds needed a favor, a banking license, information on government policy, access to someone important, they had multiple routes to get it. They built not an empire of subordinates, but a network of loyal debtors who did not feel humiliated by their debt because it had been treated with discretion and respect. Compare that to bankers who publicly boasted how much governments owed them. These were seen as loan sharks, hated by the public, and often had their property confiscated when political winds shifted. The Rothschilds, operating in the shadows, remained untouched through revolutions. In the modern world, you see this dynamic in silent networks of influence. The angel investor who helps young entrepreneurs not with large publicly announced sums, but with strategic introductions, with advice at the right time, with small checks that save startups at critical moments. Years later, when these entrepreneurs are successful, they remember. And they reciprocate with loyalty, with deal flow, with access. Or consider the mentor who identifies bright but under-resourced students, not through official scholarships with his name engraved, but through coincidences, a job that magically appears, a recommendation that opens doors, anonymous help with tuition. These students grow up to become lawyers, doctors, executives, and they remember those who helped them when no one else did. The key is timing and discretion. You don't advertise your generosity. You don't create expectations that you will continue indefinitely. You identify moments where a relatively small intervention for you has a disproportionate impact on the other. And you act discreetly. The mistake that rich people often make is trying to buy loyalty through wages and formal compensation. This creates employees, not allies. True allies are created through moments where you chose to help them when you had no obligation to do so. First tactic, keep an opportunity fund, resources set aside specifically to help strategic people in times of need. It is not public charity, it is an investment in relationships. When someone in your network faces a crisis, you can intervene quickly and discreetly. Second tactic, practice traceable anonymous generosity. Help in a way that the person knows it was you, but no one else knows. An anonymous check is useless. It doesn't create loyalty because there's no attribution. A public check creates problems. But a private message that says, "I heard you're struggling. Here's something to help. This stays between us," that creates bonding. Third tactic. Be generous not only with money, but with its intangible advantages. If you have access, open doors. If you have knowledge, share it. If you have a network, connect people. These forms of generosity do not cost money, but are often worth more to the recipient. Fourth tactic. Never ever mention your past generosity to extract present favor. The moment you say, "I helped you when you needed it, now it's your turn," you destroy goodwill and turn the relationship into a resentful transaction. Strategic generosity works best when it seems genuinely disinterested, even if it's calculated. Law 7. True wealth is measured in options, not displays. The fool measures his wealth in visible gold. The wise man measures his wealth in invisible freedom. One lives to impress, the other lives free from needing to impress. The seventh and final law is philosophical, but absolutely critical. You must fundamentally redefine what wealth means to you. It's not about having more than others. It's about having more choices than you had before. Machiavelli wrote extensively about fortune versus virtù. Fortune is what happens to you, circumstances, luck, external forces. Virtù is your ability to respond, to shape these forces, to exercise agency. True wealth, in the Machiavellian view, is not having a yacht bigger than your neighbor. It's having the ability to say no to opportunities that don't serve you. It's being able to choose who you work with, where you live, how you spend your time. It is the absence of external compulsions. But there is a cruel paradox. Most people who accumulate wealth immediately convert it into commitments that reduce their freedom. They buy huge houses that require constant maintenance and lock them in geographically. They buy luxury cars that depreciate catastrophically. They adopt expensive lifestyles that require ever-increasing income to maintain. They became richer in paper, but not freer in reality. In fact, they often become less free because they now have more to protect, more to keep, more to lose. The Stoic philosopher Seneca observed this 2,000 years ago. It is not the man who has little, but the man who desires more, who is poor. True wealth is not the absence of want, but the ability to choose which wants you pursue versus which ones you let go. In modern psychology, this is called hedonic climbing or hedonic treadmill. No matter how much money you make, if you constantly increase your spending to match, you remain at the same level of perceived financial security. The executive who earns $500,000 and spends $480,000 has the same level of anxiety as the worker who earns $50,000 and spends $48,000. True Machiavellian wealth is to create a growing gap between what you have and what you need. This gap is pure freedom. It's being able to say no. It's being able to wait. It is being able to take risks, because failure is not existential. And ironically, maintaining this gap requires invisibility. Because the moment you show off, you create social expectations that force you to spend more to keep up appearances. Showing off doesn't just make you a target, it makes you a prisoner of expectations. Marcus Aurelius was emperor of Rome from 161 to 180 AD, possibly the richest and most powerful man on earth in his time. He could have anything, do anything, to order the death of anyone, and he lived in relative simplicity, studied Stoic philosophy, and wrote meditations on self-control and detachment. His meditations, not written for publication but as a personal diary, reveal a man constantly reminding himself that external power is illusory if you have no mastery over yourself. You have power over your mind, not over external events. Accomplish this, and you will find strength. Marcus Aurelius understood that his position as emperor did not set him free. In fact, It made him a prisoner of massive expectations. He had to manage wars, political intrigues, plagues, revolts. Each decision affected millions. The weight was crushing. But he maintained inner freedom through detachment. He was not defined by his power. He did not measure his worth by how much control he had. He measured his worth by how well he fulfilled his duties while maintaining personal integrity. Compare this with Nero, who reigned approximately a century earlier. Nero had equivalent wealth and power, and he used them to build an absurd golden palace, Domus Aurea, to execute anyone he suspected of treason, to live in constant paranoia about conspiracies. He was rich, but psychologically miserable, and a prisoner of his own excesses. When Rome burned, the people blamed Nero, not because he definitely caused the fire, but because his ostentation had created so much resentment that they wanted to blame him. Eventually, he was deposed and committed suicide. Marcus Aurelius died of natural causes, respected by both his soldiers and his subjects. When he died, senators genuinely cried, not because he had impressed with displays of wealth, but because he had used his power sparingly and wisely. The lesson, the emperor who lived was simply free. The emperor who constantly needed to demonstrate greatness was a prisoner of his own insecurities. Contemporary application. You see this principle in the most successful billionaires of the modern world. Warren Buffett still lives in the same modest house he bought in 1958 for $31,500. Mark Zuckerberg famously wears the same gray t-shirt every day. These are not just eccentricities. These are strategic choices that preserve mental freedom. They don't have to spend energy thinking about impressing others. They don't have multiple properties that require management. They don't have complex wardrobes that require curation. They eliminated unnecessary decisions and commitments to maximize time and mental energy for what really matters. Contrast this with professional athletes and celebrities who make millions and immediately go broke because they have adopted lifestyles that require massive continuous spending. They have money, but they don't have freedom. They are prisoners of the mansions, the cars, the expectations that they themselves have created. The professional who earns $200,000 but lives on $80,000 has infinitely more freedom than the one who earns $500,000 and spends $490,000. The former can change careers, can turn down projects they don't like, can wait for the right opportunities. The second is in prison. A month of lost income and his $2 million home is at risk. The true measure of wealth is not how much do you have, but how long can you live comfortably without working. This metric, sometimes referred to as the financial independence number, is far more important than total net worth. Someone with $500,000 invested generating $25,000 a year who lives on $20,000 is richer in terms of freedom than someone with $5 million, but who spends $400,000 a year and needs to work constantly to maintain the lifestyle. First tactic, calculate your freedom number. The amount that, invested conservatively, would generate enough passive income to cover your basic needs indefinitely. Make this your primary goal, not status symbols. Once you reach that number, you're truly wealthy, regardless of what others think. Second tactic, strictly implement the rule. Every luxury purchase should be justified not by how much it costs, but by how much future freedom it consumes. A $100,000 car doesn't cost $100,000. It costs the $200,000 that this money could have generated in 20 years of compound investment. It costs maintenance, premium insurance, the anxiety of protecting it. When you actually do this math, most status shopping turns out to be absurdly expensive in terms of freedom. Third tactic, develop what I call a lifestyle inflation-resistant identity. Define yourself not by what you have, but by your capabilities, your relationships, your experiences. People with possession-based identities constantly need to acquire more to maintain their sense of worth. People with identities based on internal growth are immune to the compulsion to display. Fourth tactic, practice the freedom to say no test. Regularly put yourself in situations where you could make more money but choose not to because the cost in time, energy, or integrity is too high. If you can't say no to lucrative opportunities you don't want to do, you're not rich, you're dependent. True wealth is exercised through the ability to refuse. The integration of the 7 laws. So here we are. You have crossed the territory that Machiavelli mapped 5 centuries ago. 7 laws that separate those who accumulate wealth and lose it from those who accumulate and maintain it through generations. Let's integrate what we learn, because these laws do not exist in isolation. They form a system, a complete philosophy of how to navigate the world when you have what others desire. Invisibility is your shield. The less people know about your actual features, the fewer attack vectors you offer. This is not paranoia. It is recognizing human nature as it is, not as we would like it to be. Envy is your invisible enemy, more dangerous than open hostility because it is denied even by those who feel it. Your only defense is not to feed her. And you don't feed it by keeping your victories private. Visible effort buys legitimacy. People need a narrative. Give them the story of the work, the struggle, the journey, but never the precise conclusion of the reward. Let them imagine that you are comfortable. Don't let them know that you're beyond financial worries. The next ones are the most dangerous because they have access, knowledge, and the confusing motivation of those who expected perpetual equality. Protect yourself by increasing strategic distance and never, ever mixing intimacy with finances. Power through others is protected power. When you can influence outcomes without being seen as the cause, you have control without vulnerability. This is the most sophisticated form of power, and the safest. Strategic generosity builds invisible networks, not through public display or ostentatious charity, but through discreet acts at the perfect time for the right people. You don't buy loyalty with salaries. You conquer it with timing and discretion. And finally, freedom is the ultimate metric. Not how much you have, but how many choices you have. Not the size of your bank account, but the size of the gap between what you earn and what you need. Because this gap is pure freedom. And freedom, not display, is the goal of all real wealth. The final paradox. Here is the paradox that Machiavelli forces us to confront. Modern society tells us that success doesn't count unless it's recognized, that victories must be shared, that wealth means nothing if you can't show it. This is a lie, a comfortable lie that keeps people vulnerable. True power does not need external validation. True wealth does not need an audience. True success is lived, not performed. When you understand this, truly understand it on a visceral level, you free yourself from a prison that most people don't even know they're in. The prison of social approval. The prison of comparison. The prison of living your life as a performance for strangers who don't care about you in any way. The choice before you. You are now at a decision point. You can ignore all of that. You may think, that's too cynical. People aren't like that. I want to share my joy with the world. And you have that right. Live publicly, celebrate visually, and discover inevitably, painfully, why Machiavelli was right. Or you can accept that the world is as it is, not as you want it to be. That human nature has predictable patterns that were true in ancient Rome and are true in modern Instagram. That envy, resentment, and self-interest are real forces that you ignore at your peril. If you choose the second path, the Machiavellian path, understand that you are doing more than adopting tactics. You are adopting a philosophy, a way of seeing the world that prioritizes reality over idealism, effectiveness over moral purity, results on approval, That doesn't make you a bad person. It makes you a person who understands power. The consequences of knowledge. There is a weight in knowing this that you cannot ignore. Once you see the patterns, how envy operates, how proximity creates vulnerability, how display invites destruction, you can't not see them. You'll start observing in real time. You'll see the friend whose face changes imperceptibly when you mention an achievement. You will notice how conversations with certain relatives always drift towards financial comparisons. You will recognize the dynamics when someone tries to extract information about your economic situation. And you will have to make choices. Choices of silence when every cell of your body wants to share. Distance choices when you would prefer proximity. Control choices when it would be easier to be spontaneous. That's the cost, and it's not small. But consider the alternative. Consider how many people you know who made it and then got destroyed, not because of incompetence, not by bad luck, but because they didn't understand the game they were playing. The entrepreneur who sold his company for millions and advertised on Facebook only to be sued by former employees who claimed contributions. The investor who boasted cryptocurrency gains and became a target for hackers and kidnappers. The executive who showed off his new lifestyle and lost decades-long friendships in quiet resentment. These were not bad or stupid people. They were just people who didn't understand Machiavelli's golden rule. When you get rich, don't tell anyone. If you've absorbed these 7 laws, if they resonate as truth on a level you feel in your stomach, then you're ready for what's next. Start small. Don't try to implement everything at once. Start by simply observing. Notice who in your life shows envy versus genuine joy for your success. Notice how much of your need to share wins is genuine versus seeking validation. Notice how power dynamics change when financial information is shared versus hidden. Then start making adjustments. Maybe you'll share 20% less about your finances this month. Perhaps you embezzle credit in a situation where you would normally claim it. Maybe you help someone discreetly instead of publicly. And observe the results. See how your anxiety about money decreases when fewer people know what you have. See how relationships improve when unequal power dynamics aren't constantly present. See how opportunities appear when you build a reputation for competence versus wealth. Slowly, these laws will cease to be tactics that you consciously execute. They will become instincts, reflexes, a natural way to navigate the world. And then, paradoxically, you will discover that by hiding your wealth, you have become richer in ways that cannot be measured in money, rich in peace of mind, rich in genuine relationships, rich in freedom to be yourself without a performative mask. Let me end with a truth that Machiavelli understood but rarely articulated explicitly. The ultimate goal of all power, of all wealth, of all strategy is not to dominate others. It is to dominate oneself. It is to achieve a state where you are governed not by external needs, not by the opinions of others, not by compulsions to prove your worth, but by your own conscious choices. Quiet wealth isn't about being secretive out of fear. It's about being free from needing approval. It's about having so much control over your life that you don't need others to validate your choices. It is the difference between the slave who has no chains because he has run away and is in hiding, and the free man who has no chains because no one has power over him to put them on. The first lives in fear, the second lives in power. When you get rich and don't tell anyone, you're not hiding. You are freeing yourself from the need to impress, freeing yourself from the expectations of others, freeing yourself from the infinite game of comparison that has no winners, only increasingly miserable losers. You're going to fail at that sometimes. We all fail. There will be times when you share too much, trust too soon, show off when you should have hidden. This is human. What matters is not perfection, it's direction. Are you moving toward more or less control over your life? More. Freedom or less? More peace or less? Use these 7 laws as a compass, not as a prison. They point north, but you still have to choose to walk in that direction. And when you get there, when you've built real wealth protected by strategic invisibility, sustained by loyal relationships built on discreet generosity, and measured in freedom rather than display, you'll understand something few understand. The greatest luxury that money can buy is not an object. It is the ability to live as if money does not matter, to make decisions based on what's right for you, not what you can afford, to relate to people without the noise of financial inequality, to sleep peacefully knowing that you didn't paint a target on your back. This is what Machiavelli was actually teaching. Not how to be rich, but how to be free. And freedom, in the end, is the only thing worth fighting for. Now you know. What you do with that knowledge is entirely up to you.